Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens. This is Jake along with Scott, and today we are excited to be joined by a relatively new person to Samson Surrey, but an industry veteran, Elayne Duff, the Director of Advocacy, again, for Samson Surrey. So Elayne, thank you for joining Scott on the Bourbon Lens.
I am so excited to be here. I think this is my first true bourbon podcast I've ever got to be on. So thanks, guys. And I've been in this industry for a long time.
Well, I'm glad that we could get you on the podcast. I know it's a long time coming. We've had a great relationship with the PR team and Colin from Emblem PR for a long time. And it's exciting to see all the changes and all the great things happening around the brands that fall under the Samson Surrey portfolio. So excited to talk Brenne, Few, Widow Jane, and the gamut along the way here. But before we get started, for those who don't know you, and you did mention there was a name change along the way, so there's people that may recognize your name just in general. Can you just share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been in this amazing industry for the past 23 years. Within it, I've gotten to work for two of the biggest suppliers within the industry. So I started my career at Diageo. So that's where I kind of earned my street cred as a mixologist, as well as a brand ambassador for their entire, what they call their luxury portfolio. It's where I got to learn so much about whiskey. It's where I fell in love with cocktails, with whiskey, with gin, tequila, you name it. There's not really anything I don't drink or really have an admiration for, except for net, not my thing. But everything else. It's also where I got to be on shows like Bar Rescue, the fun show Watch What Happens Live. So I got to do a lot of cool things. I was there for quite some time as a mixologist, as a brand ambassador. I've gotten to see kind of this industry kind of unfold because I kind of got in right as the craft cocktail movement was happening, right in 2005. Got to see the craft spirit movement happening, which is very exciting thinking about now that I work for a company like Samson Surrey, where all these craft distillers kind of bringing it home, as well as the craft beer movement. Because I actually, after I left, I went to work for Anheuser-Busch, and I actually worked on their craft beer division, which was ZX Ventures. And there I worked with, brands like Goose Island and things of that nature. And there I actually got to learn, I drove back into my marketing kind of event side of my background. And I got to launch and create brand strategy and education programs for beers around the world. So I got to travel the world, which was so much fun. And that led me into creating my own company. So before I came to Samson Surrey, I feel like what I've been doing has literally trained me for the position I have now, because I run and I still do, I have a company called the Beverage Brand Ambassador Academy. It is the first ever online training academy for brand ambassadors, because I don't know about you, if you've ever met a brand ambassador or been a brand ambassador, nobody tells you how to do the job. So that's how I spent my COVID. I actually created an entire training program that's all self-guided. And it's used as an onboarding program for a lot of companies out there, a lot of small companies when they hire brand ambassadors. And I'm actually currently using it for myself, for my own team. So it kind of led me into my role now. I kind of got, the call. They said, person at my position previously, Kyle McHugh, who's legendary, awesome individual. He was leaving, and he said, Elayne, I couldn't think of a better person to replace me. He goes, I know how much you love the role of brand ambassadors, and this is what you do. It's my specialty. So, and I always laugh because they always ask me when I got my interview with the owners, the founders, Robert and Juan, they said, well, why do you want to come with us? I was like, have you seen your portfolio? I mean, it is one of the best portfolios out there. I mean, it is. I'm a big lover of craft spirits. I've worked with giant companies but at home I drink small brands. So to be able to drink, Brenne, which is a single estate French whiskey, which I know we're going to taste, Widow Jane, which is right here in Red Hook, Brooklyn, Few out of Chicago. And then we also have Blue Point, was a gin because I'm a huge gin nerd. And then Tequila Ocho and Vago, Mezcal Vago. I mean, it was like a no-brainer. I'm like, guys, you're working with people I actually know, and some of them I've known for years. And I get to manage a team of brand ambassadors. And that's what I do now. So as the advocacy director for Samson Surrey. I have a team, soon to be 9 brand ambassadors that are across the country. Yeah, that are across the country. 6 local ones, meaning they work in like Chicago, New York, California, Dallas, Texas, and Philadelphia. And then I have 2 national ones, one for Whisky, who's coming on very soon in October. And I have a national agave person. So it's a really good team made up of such incredible, talented individuals, all former bar people and hospitality people. And I got to kind of help them like create like amazing careers and like succeed out in the industry. So it's a really fun job. And we get to do so many cool events. That's half the other part of my job, is just doing every whiskey festival you've ever been to. I think we're part of, and every coffee event out there. So I'm sure we'll run into each other at some point, because we're always we're participating in all of them. And that's pretty much my job. I basically get to manage them, train them, work with marketing, work with these incredible brands to kind of bring them to life and make sure they're getting out there to the trade and consumers in the right way. Make sure my team has the best education they possibly can so that they can deliver the right message and the right information. And it's pretty cool. So yeah, that's my job. And I just started in May. So it's been a 23-year career, and I hope to stay here until the end of it.
Well,
hit the ground running.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No kidding. So I have one question, because you mentioned Bar Rescue. Is it as intense as it is on the actual show, or is the behind the scenes not really a thing? Because I just saw an interview with Red.
Is intense.
I saw an interview with Redman that they really faked MTV Cribs. So like. Mm-hmm. Do they fake the confrontation, or is that like a real legit, like, is it that intense while you're on site? Like,
oh yeah. I'll tell you, that's what I tell everybody. So I did 6 shows, and I have black hair in most of them. So it's, I did like the original. I was in the first couple of seasons, and 3 things are true. The owners are generally that dumb. The bar is generally that dirty. Those are the 2 things that are really true. When it comes to the drama, it actually does happen that way, but we do it on purpose. It's like we find the weakest link, like behind the scenes, we find the weakest link. And then it's like your job, like I could never do it. And most of us who come on as like John Taffer's sidekicks are too nice people to like do it. He's very good at doing it. And you just poke the bear. You poke the bear until the bear breaks. And he is exceptionally good at it. Like they used to be in my ear, like, Elayne, you got to be meaner. I'm like, I'm not a mean person. Like these are just normal people trying to make a job and a living. And I'm like, no, like, but yeah, that stuff is true. But yeah, those are the 3 things that are true.
It's a very intense show. It ends up being like the show we like watch when we come home in the afternoon, when we go to the beach. We watch it while we eat lunch, and then like the kid will take a nap or whatever, and we'll just sit there and watch 2 episodes of Bar Rescue. So it's always interesting to know how reality TV works.
It is. When you work on, I mean, you write your own scripts, you're figuring out what you're going to say, because I'm not that witty. So I would have to figure it out. And John, like, I always laugh because he would, every time I thought like, they're like, Elayne, this is your scene. I would have a whole thing written out. And then John would step in and take my scene before I even got to talk. I'd be like, dude, like I just started. And I was like, you don't get enough airtime. Like, come on. But people tell me they learn a lot. Like they've learned a lot. And, I try to take it very seriously, making sure the information I gave was solid, and that the recipes they got. And I walked away with a little more information. I have no idea if any of those bars are still open. Probably not. But have you ever watched the pirate episode? That's one of my favorites. I was on that one. I had I had black hair and a bob.
Okay. I know exactly which one that is.
Yeah.
It's, and it was really funny, whatever the flavor of the month that his partners were, right? Like that would be the cocktail, right? So like Captain Morgan, like a lot of Captain Morgan cocktails. And so I was like, all right, guys, let's get off the rum. Where's the whiskey in these? And like normally the whiskey would be blacked out because they didn't have the sponsorship for it.
Absolutely. All the things. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Well, no, that's awesome. And, I want to press into the brand ambassador thing, because we've interacted with quite a few over the years, and they all do it a little bit different. And you see like some brand ambassadors are just solely pop up at liquor store, Johnny's liquor store, and hand out pours. Like, what do you find to be the most effective way to be a brand ambassador?
Yeah, well, let's step back to what you just said. Those are not brand ambassadors. Those are promotional models that somehow the brand started calling brand ambassadors, because it pisses me off. Because a brand ambassador is somebody who literally, this is their career. This is what they do, like every single day. They wake up, breathe their brands. They're all about advocacy. They work full time for the company. They don't just pop up at events. They do lots of events. But, like my team, they're tasked with, we make sure they have the education so that they become whiskey experts, they become tequila experts, they become mezcal experts. Like we're all going, they all get to go to Few Distillery to actually work there. They get to go to Widow Jane. They get to take classes like, WSET. Like we want them to come out of the gate. So they're not just training about our brands, they're actually training. We're helping elevate the industry. Because as you know, especially after COVID, there's not a lot of the staff are new and they're green. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen right now. So that's what my team is working on. It's like, how can I help educate the current staff that's in the account so we can help them not just sell our brands, but their entire portfolio. And then also, how do we teach them about cocktails? Because almost everybody I work with is a former mixologist, bartender who knows about cocktails. So that's the difference. There's a major difference. It's like the pop-up brand about, and nothing to, because I was one of those people. I started my career as a promotional model. That's what we were called, but maybe it's not a nice word to say anymore or something. So we're now called brand ambassadors. And then it became a full-time career. So it is something that, it's one of the most complicated jobs in the industry because there's a lot of politics involved. Because you not only have to deal with the brand people, the brand owners, and if it's a big company, the marketing people, you also have to deal with the salespeople, right? So you're making the salespeople happy. You then have to go into a bar and work with the bar, and every bar is different, right? The personalities of the bartenders, the personality of buyers are different. Then you have to go to liquor stores. They're all different, right? There's different types of buyers. So you really have to know how to navigate around all those different personality types. How to be an event person because you have to execute a lot of events, how to be a marketing person because you have to create like cool programs to execute. And a lot of them are really creative and they come up with the ones on their own. And then you have to know how to educate and teach in an engaging way. And then you have to know how to sell. It's a hard gig. That's why a lot of people don't stay in it forever, but it's a good gig and it can be a lot of fun for many, many years. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it definitely did. Because it's not, that job doesn't seem for the faint of heart, right? Like you have to be able to grind it out a little bit is what it seems like. Got to be on the road, got to travel, you got to understand, and you got to work at it, right? Like if you're not training your palate to understand the subtle nuances and making your people around you better that you're trying to sell into and advocate for, then you're not going to get very far. It's like people like to ask, how do you train your palate? Well, you have to drink it, you have to smell it, you have to like do all the like knows your bourbon kits or the the Stave and Thief Society. Like that's part of their thing. You buy it and you can smell all the flavors, and so you can start to pick up congeners and different flavors. And it's not as easy as it seems just to pick up a glass and start telling people this is what you should taste or expect. I mean, Scott knows. I mean, we've gone through it all.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like you have to immerse yourself in the brand, and then just like if we're talking whiskey culture, you have to be so knowledgeable about it that people look to you as the resource, not just, oh, you're just trying to sell me this bottle here. Yep. Like, I don't want just the bottle. I want to know all about the company, because especially in today's world, people just nerd out and want all the information you can give them.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. You need to know the category, because it's like you can say all the things like it's aged in this type of cask and it has this. So why? So what's the benefit of that? Like, what does it bring to the table? And why, as a consumer, or why do I care? Like, and if I don't understand the context, if you can't tell me like, well, normally it's aged in this type of cask and this is the flavors you get. So when we take it from that cask into this cask, this is the transformation that's going to happen. Then it's like, oh, I get it now. But if you don't understand the category knowledge, you can't intelligently make those comparisons. And a lot of the job, as you said, is about drinking. So you need to know how to balance, educate your palate, right? Be out at night, talking to bartenders, communicating with them. You might be out to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And then you have to be at a distributor conference at 8 a.m. So that's why a lot of people can burn out. And if you're a national brand ambassador, you're on the road a lot. So I do an entire seminar. Like one of the things I teach in my program is like how to balance your life, and how to, it's a big topic in the industry about how to live a well-balanced life so you don't burn out. Because a lot of people do. Because it can be, you're surrounded by the only, legalized drug in the world all the time. So you really need to know how to balance that lifestyle.
Definitely. And Scott and I know how to balance it here on the podcast, because it's not that it doesn't show up regularly and people ask for our opinions regularly. The backlog of whiskey is never short.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I'm the resource for so many of my friends, like, don't work in the industry. They're like, they'll be at a liquor store. I just get, what bottles should I buy? What restaurant should I go to? What bar? And as a brand ambassador, my God, they've learned some good tricks of the trade. One of the best ones is creating a Google map of every city of your bars. So that way, when people ask you like, hey, I'm going to Chicago, they just send them the map.
Oh, nice.
That's smart.
It's a great trick.
It's like, hit all these places.
So,
yes.
And another thing you talked about other than brand ambassador is cocktail and mixologist, right? So that's how you get your start. We would be remiss if we didn't ask you, what's your favorite cocktail to make?
Oh, that's it. I mean, I am a gin martini drinker.
Okay.
I happen to love, and I know that's the simplest, one of the simplest cocktails out, but it's not. I've had a lot of bad martinis. I've had a lot of bad martinis. Oh my goodness. And you just have to, especially as a brand ambassador, you just have to suck it up. You just have to be like, that's delicious. And inside you're like, but for me, one of my favorite drinks, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I love a Boulevardier. Like, that's one of my favorites. A great whiskey cocktail is a twist and a Negroni. It's one of my favorites. I finally learned how to say it because I didn't say it correctly for many, many years. And my husband made fun of me all the time. And if you've had a few drinks, try ordering that drink. It's not easy to do. But yeah, I will say that's my favorite. And then I'm a sucker for like a French 75. Yeah, I think that's like classic cocktails are just, something that I just adore.
Scott, do you know what a French 75 is? Because I have no clue.
It's champagne and whiskey.
You can do that. Actually, Brenne makes a great one, but it's originally made with cognac. So cognac, okay. I make it with a split base of Cointreau and simple syrup and lemon juice, and then champagne, and then you top it with champagne. So it's a champagne cocktail.
Okay, yeah. So I wasn't too far off.
No, you're not. But actually, I was going to say one of the things I started getting into them because Brenne whiskey is actually makes a fantastic. When we start talking about it, it's like it makes a great French 75.
That sounds really good and dangerous. And as Elayne is a podcaster a little bit herself, that we like to call a tease and a lead right there. So let's go in and talk about Brenne as a program, right? Because I had never heard of Brenne French single malt before. We got a note from Colin on what was coming and that palette. So what can you tell us about Brenne as a whole? And then we dive into the whiskey itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I know they won't be able to see this, but as you can say, so Brenne, it's a really great story. I'll tell you that quickly. It's like Alison Park. She's a former ballerina. And what would you think? How would a ballerina get into whiskey? But she knew, as a ballerina, had limited career. She wanted to start something. She was very entrepreneurial. She's a very smart woman. And she really just started admiring. She was traveling around trying to figure out what she wanted. And she wanted to make whiskey. She really loved whiskey. Started learning everything there was about whiskey and decided, like, does she want a Japanese whiskey, a Scotch whiskey, a French whiskey? And then she went to France and she met her now distiller. And when she was 24 years old, and she saw that he was growing. It was in the Cognac region of France, and saw that, there was, grape fields, and then there was wheat fields growing right next to grape fields. And she was like, well, that's odd. And she met with the distiller, and he was actually making his own whiskey for his family. And she kind of proposed this project to him, and because she fell in love with what he was making. And he said he didn't want to go, and then eventually he said, yes, I will. It is a really original whiskey because it's made in cognac, which is something you don't see very often. It's a single estate. So it means all the, obviously, the wheat is being grown in one estate. It is, as you guys, and we were tasting it, we were talking about before, So when you smell, for those listening, when you smell Brenne, so it is made in an alembic still. Now, alembic still is generally made to make brandy. So it really is not what typical most whiskeys are made in pot stills or column stills or hybrid still. But alembic still is generally used to produce fruit spirits like a cognac or a brandy or an armagnac. So it really helps to push the like fruit notes forward. So when you smell and taste Brenne, it has this like blueberry note to it, which is all coming from the barley. So it's kind of interesting. Then they use yeast that's like from a Champagne region. So that brings out like a floral note. And then she ages the whiskey in wet XO cognac casks, as well as dry French oak casks, right? So she does 6 to 8 years in a wet XO cognac cask. And that note, along with the alembic still together, brings that's where that creme brulee note comes from. And then the French oak is kind of bringing this, like, kind of transforms into an apricot. So it's interesting, like all these flavors together, because as you guys said, like it doesn't smell like any whiskey you've ever had. It's kind of creamy. It's kind of got this like creme brulee and burnt caramel. And that's from the barley coming from where it is in France. It's coming from the yeast, the Champagne style yeast, and it's coming from the alembic still. And then that wet cognac cask really, because it actually absorbs some of the cognac, really kind of brings that forward. And then the combination of French oak. So it's delicious. It's like very light, very easy to drink. It's just something that just, when you first drink it, I would say for people who are kind of like, I'm not sure if I like whiskey yet, this might be this great like beginning whiskey. It's like this start whiskey, and it makes delicious cocktails like the French 75.
So it's really interesting. I'd never heard of a French single malt before, right? Because obviously you think of Scotch single malt, Irish single malt, and now American single malt. Japanese is also huge. So it was really interesting to see that French play on it. And then to talk about the barrels, right? Because French oak is definitely one of the first words that I wrote down was perfumey. French oak gives me a more of a bouquet of perfume on that, and that the bouquet is blueberry, and there's a little bit of honey orchard type deal going on, and then the brulee and the caramel definitely shows up towards the back end of that nose. I mean, it was kind of astonishing because I'd never gotten those notes. Scott, what about you?
To have this whiskey arrive and see how light it is, and this whiskey, if you close your eyes and just taste it, you're like, what is that? Yeah, I would be super confused. You know, it's almost like a really proofy, like fruit wine. Like it's got a lot of fruit notes in it. Obviously, we talked about blueberry, which is just weird. But then it's got that vanilla, like creamy vanilla-ness that for like a 40% alcohol, like you would not expect that like viscous of a whiskey.
No.
But maybe it's the still.
It's got that spice, and the spice also coming from the French oak, right? Because French oak also produces not only that, but it also gives a lot of spice notes to it, like a little bit of baking spice, but that's more American, but like different spices, like there's different French oak spices that comes forward. And I'm not using the right terminology, but then to her, when I was talking to Allison last week, she said the wet XO barrel is what really brings so much influence between that and the alembic still. She's like, just because they're wet, you're also getting, and she tried different barrels. They tried VSOP barrels, they tried VS barrels, but it had to be XO barrels, which are not cheap barrels, obviously. And they're wet, so they don't rechar the barrel. So it still has the cognac in it. So you're getting a little bit of that into the whiskey. They're sitting in there for 6 to 8 years. And then it's blending, and then the other half is sitting in the French oak cask, and then they blend the two together. So you're getting the complexity of the two. And then the barley just being grown where it's grown in Cognac, France, has a very specific indigenous note to it. And that's something that's really specific about all our whiskeys. They all have a DNA from where they are.
Yeah.
There's something very specific to where they come from that really stands out. And that barley, we've all tasted other things made from barley. It does not taste like this.
No.
And it's because it's in Cognac, and it's because of the soil and the other things that are planted. It's planted next to grapevines. It's like the soil kind of the nutrients in the soil is different, she told me. You know, that's how she explained it to me. And that's why this barley has this particular note to it. So it's really unique. I really like it. I think it's really delicious.
I mean, this would be perfect in like a highball.
Oh, yeah. I've actually had this in a highball. Like a highball with a squeeze of lemon, it's delicious.
Yeah, like this doesn't need a lot to make it. Like if you wanted a summer cocktail, this doesn't need much.
Yeah, No, absolutely. Like I put this, we were serving these, we were at Bar Comet Berlin, and we were doing this with nice club soda with a squeeze of lemon, and it was perfect. It was a really delicious drink. So yeah, perfect summer cocktail.
Yeah, and definitely looking for something different. And the other thing is have club soda on your bar, right? If you don't have club soda on your bar back, like you're doing yourself a disservice because just a simple highball get you real far in life.
Absolutely. And who doesn't have, a sparkling water, maker in their home these days? I mean, I know I do because we drink sparkling water all the time and it works perfectly fine.
True.
Yeah. So this is just an easy drinking whiskey. So it's definitely up there as one of my favorites.
And so are they aging everything in France? Or are they bringing it back to the States and aging it? What's that look like?
It sits in France. Everything is done in France. It is aged in there. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know where it's bottled. I can't recall. I do know it's aged there though. It's produced there. It's aged there. And I'm pretty sure it's bottled there.
Cool. No, I mean, I think this is a great way to start off because Samson Surrey is unique, right? In its portfolio that it's built over the years. We've talked about all the brands, few, and that's probably where we're going to go next here is Paul Haletko, who is a very interesting individual. It's based upon interesting and dynamic whiskey creators, right? And I think as we make that transition, like having that French interesting characteristics and now moving to Evanston, Illinois, where Paul Haletko has really taken his literal riff, because he's a guitar player, on whiskey and created some beautiful yet intricate whiskeys. And Scott, we're talking bottled and bond today in particular, which I know is your favorite type of bottle of whiskey.
Yeah, as always, like love the 100 proof. So,
and yeah, this is my one thing
for myself. Okay. I'm a big fan. So
yeah, well, this is my one thing. This is my one connection to Heaven Hill. They just had to add this one to the portfolio, right? Because they're the kings of bottled and bond. So they add Samson Surrey and they add another bottled and bond to the portfolio when they adopted Samson and Surrey. So that's my one nod to that great acquisition that they made last year. But it's great because they allow you all to keep doing your all's thing, right? Like
absolutely.
That's the great part about this, and the funkiness of that still and the whiskey that's produced on it continues to be delightful up in Evanston. So what's been your thought of just engaging with Paul and that team, that kind of ragtag team is what I feel like. I feel like they're like the A team. Like you have your group of band of misfits like banded together to make a good whiskey and bring it to the people.
It's so funny. I could describe it just like that. It is, when I went there and have you been there before? Have you ever gone?
I have not. Scott, have you been able to head up there yet? No, it's one of our destinations we need to get to.
You should. Because it's in, as you said, it's in Evanston, right? And Paul being such a rebel, because Evanston had the longest prohibition, and you had Frances Elizabeth Willard, and that's where the initials for a few come from, because she was leading the temperance movement. And as you said, Few is like the first legal distillery in Evanston, right? So this place was the heart and home of temperance movement. And Paul is just that rebel, he's such a smart guy, and, he's a rock and roll kind of dude. And he was just like, he retired. Well, he left with his career, and he's like, I really want to make good whiskey. And it took him a while to figure out the formula. But it's in a garage. You could walk right down the street and not see it. And it's down an alley. So it's got this speakeasy kind of feel to it, because you go down an alley and it looks like a place where people fix cars. It's got this outside image of I really thought, I was like, it can't be that. And it's that. And this team is so passionate. They've all been there for quite some time. And Paul just kind of leading the charge. And he's so, he loves to innovate and create new things. And, I told him, I was like, bottled and bond was one of my favorite whiskeys, because I love a high proof spirit. I love 100 proof. And for those of you who don't know what bottled and bond means, it has to be a minimum age of 4 years, and it has to be at least, 100 proof whiskey, and it has to be aged in a bottled and bond warehouse that's monitored by the government. And back in the day, as we all know, it was something that the government did to make sure that you got quality whiskey, right? And, and as the trade, the industry loves bottled and bond because it makes such great cocktails. But this team is out there, and now we have Sydney. She's the head distiller, right? So we got this woman head distiller, and then we got Riley, who used to be the head distiller, but he's running operations. And then you got Paul out there, and there's a whole team. I mean, there's a bunch of them. There's another woman distiller that's all together, and they're so passionate. I mean, these guys, I'll be calling them, and they're like, it's like 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, what time are you going home? They're like 1, 2 in the morning. I mean, they're distilling all the time because they're in this tiny facility. And they're trying to keep up with demand, and they don't want to change anything. And as you know, their biggest thing is grain to glass. Like most people buy NGS age, or they buy other whiskeys off the marketplace, which is nothing wrong with that. But Paul was really proud that he could buy his grain. Like he actually buys his corn, he buys his barley, buys his rye. He mills it there on site, ferments it there. And he's really particular about this fermentation. He really wanted to create something unique. He uses a Saison yeast for the bourbon and a red wine yeast for the rye to get very specific flavor profiles. And as he says, he's like, a lot of people work out the kinks in distillation. I wanted to go into the still like almost perfect and then just distill it up to proof. And then when it goes in the barrel, it's just become even better, but it goes into the barrel great. Like he's like, I wanted to distill it so it comes off the still in the right way. He's like, but before it gets there, it's the fermentation is already giving it all the flavor it needs. And in distillation, we just get it to where it needs to go. And I love that about him.
Yeah, and there's no better place to be than in the futures crop trade center of the world, which is Chicago, right? So you have your New York Stock Exchange, which happens in New York. You have your Chicago Grain and Futures Exchange that happens in Chicago. So he's in a great place to see what futures market looks like for the grain in particular, and then buy it from all the local farmers in and around, because you're not far from Wisconsin there. You're not far from Iowa there, right? So you can get a lot of local grain there. And you're not too far from barley and rye, because Minnesota is not far away either. So he's been able to source everything so close to home, which is great. And it produces really flavorful whiskey. Like it's been a while since we drank. Paul was one of our Patreon tasting club maybe a year ago. He was one of the first one. Him and Lisa were back to back when Lisa was still at Widow Jane. And I remember those bottled and bond standing out quite a bit. And today it like really stands out. Going from Brenne to the bottle and bond, like the flavors are just ramped up a ton. So Scott, what are you getting and your thoughts on this one? Because I can't let our bottled and bond expert not give his opinion first.
Go for it, Scott.
So I love that Few is distilled like in a garage in like an industrial setting, because what I imagine is that Few could be out in the middle of like farmland. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me a lot of like some of our favorite farm distilleries like Prairie Ranch and Starlight, because it just tastes like it was grown and distilled and bottled all in one spot. It's very like it's got some grain content, but it's very just like traditional what bourbon should taste like. I just get like a lot of apple and cinnamon with this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wanted to go for that cinnamon. That was something he really specific was going for. And when I met Paul, like literally it was the first, when I came into the company, it was the first place I went. And Paul was explaining to me, he said, I can't compete with bourbon, like the traditional bourbon from Kentucky. I have to be very specific to Chicago. I want to do something that's Chicago specific. And he's like, I want to do something that's kind of uniquely ours. And it's his style is bold. He wants to be a bold, full flavored bourbon or rye. And he wanted that cinnamon note. He wanted cinnamon and clove and orange. That's why he used a specific type of yeast. It's why he uses the grains that he picks. But, and I love his mash bill is so easy. It's 70-20-10 for all his spirits. So this is 70% corn, 20% rye, and 10% barley. So that 10% barley is obviously going to give you that creamy kind of notes to it. And then that rye is going to give you a little bit of spice. And then you get all that softness from the corn. So I think it's like a really nice balance. Someone can be too sweet, can be a little spicy. Like this is like that nice sweet spot in between, which I love.
Yeah. This one has fall written all over it for me. Like it's cherry, almond, vanilla. on the
Very,
nose.
Absolutely.
With the little that cinnamon's there, but like the palate was like cherry vanilla Coke is what kind of showed up on the palate for me, with that slight oak tannin, which I love. Like I love, if you're gonna have red fruits, dark red fruits, give me a little tannin, make me think of my dry red wines that I like. And so I get that, and that almost like toasted vanilla stays with you throughout the entire process. And not to get too nerdy, but like when you can get notes that show up from nose to palate to finish, then you're like, they know what they're doing there. Like they've created something that is truly flavorful and impactful. And this would be like, give me this in an old fashioned and you would be blown away. Like, I think this one is just hitting out of the park, and it just, the pot still funkiness, all that stuff that, that's what it has to me. I don't know if it is a pot still, but like, it's got some funky vibes to it. Like it is a pot still.
Yeah, it's a hybrid still. So it's got a little bit of that. So column and hybrid, but don't quote me on the column, but it's a hybrid stat. I know it's a hybrid still. Crap, I hope I'm right about that. You cut that out.
No, you're all good. We'll look back at it. You got a lot going on and you haven't eaten lunch yet.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's still it is a column. I am right. It's just looking at my notes. It is a column and a hybrid. It's a combination of the two. So he's a column and a hybrid still. But he really was very specific. Yeah, he wanted that. You're talking about the old fashioned. Like to me, as somebody who came in this industry making cocktails, like I always love a rye old fashioned because I wanted that spiciness. But the great thing about the bottled and bond is it has that. It has, and even his regular bourbon, it has all that spiciness. So it is a perfectly balanced. It's a lot of bourbons to me when you go into an old fashioned can be too sweet because you're adding the sugar and you have the sweetness of the corn, where this has that boldness of the rye. It's a nice high rye bourbon. So it really kind of makes a very balanced old fashioned, which I love.
Amen. Sign me up for rye old fashions all day, every day, but this one I could use as a bourbon because it has those notes. But rye old fashions are the way to go. And Few makes a hell of a rye. People are like, that might not be talked about a lot.
Oh yeah,
but their rye whiskey is very solid. And like they're a very versatile whiskey company because they do have the American whiskey that is even more unique. And then they've done some weird stuff like one of our Patreon members wrote a review for. Oh, it was like the
cold cut?
Yeah, the cold cut. Yeah, the cold cut.
Yeah.
Which is
the cold cut is really fun. I mean, people love that because instead of distilling, so as we know, you proof down a whiskey with water, and instead of the water, he replaces the water with cold brew coffee. So it's not enough that's going to keep you awake at night, and it's not enough that the coffee overwhelms. It is bourbon first. And then the coffee is very subtle in the back. It's like you get like a little bit of coffee notes, a little bit of chocolate. People go nuts for it. They love that whiskey. I love it. It's really great. And then the other one is the Immortal Rye. So he uses an oolong tea to proof it down. Oh my God. But that you taste the tea. Like there's the tannins from the tea and it's delicious. It's one of my favorite rye whiskeys to work with.
Yeah. So, it's really interesting that all of these companies, right, have a kind of a bootstrapped mentality, right? Like they've bootstrapped it together and the team has come alongside them to help them bolster and grow beyond probably all of their wildest imaginations from the beginning to now. And I think none more than that than Widow Jane, right? Like, so like as we transition into probably the most well-known brand of the group. If you would, I don't know if you would agree with that, but that was the one that I saw all the time. It always was top shelf. The 10-year always stood out to me at a very approachable price for 10-year-old bourbon. So where does Widow Jane sit right now, and how are they continuing to, kind of build that name up over the last, years?
Lisa was obviously, Lisa met, but the good news is Sienna, who was her prodigy, is now distilling for her. So Sienna kind of been there. She's been there for quite some time, and she learned under Lisa. So Lisa's knowledge is continuing on within the whiskey, and I'm continually impressed. I'm impressed by the team. Again, as you said, it's like bootstraps, scrappy, but they are so passionate about what they are making. I mean, there's such a united team. They're so passionate about it. And, Widow Jane has one of the coolest stories. I mean, it's from Red Hook, Brooklyn. So whenever somebody comes over and we're doing a Widow event, I'm like, welcome to Brooklyn. Because Brooklyn alone just makes it cool, because Brooklyn's a cool place. But being in Red Hook, but their story is so interesting in the fact that, people always ask me, so Widow Jane, is that a person? I'm like, no. So you're not the Widow Jane? I'm like, no, I'm not the Widow Jane. I get asked that all the time when you do tastings. All my staff do if they're a woman, which is funny. But Widow Jane, so it's the name, I'm sure you guys know this, is the name of the mine, right? It's the name of a mine where the aquifer is, where we actually get the water. One of actually our employees, Michelle Clark, she has a house right on the same property with the mine itself. So this is an aquifer. It's a limestone aquifer. So very similar to, limestone, as we know from Kentucky, where, what makes the water so great. So the fact that they actually take that water and truck it down once a week to Brooklyn to proof down their whiskey alone already tells you that they're doing something kind of special, because this water does have an impact on the flavor of this whiskey, right? The other thing is, it's all about the blending. So they pick the best whiskeys from Indiana and Kentucky. They bring them into their warehouse, and we're continually expanding. The one thing that's really cool, and as you mentioned, Heaven Hill, and you got Samson Surrey. Heaven Hill, as you said, they don't mess around with us. They let us continue doing. And the one thing that Samson Surrey does really well, it was one of the questions I asked her in my interview. I said, what are you going to do when you expand? Are you going to ruin the things that we're doing? And they said, absolutely not. We're just going to replicate exactly what we're doing. We're just going to build the exact same thing right next to it. So whatever they do in every product, they just replicate everything they're doing, and they just build another one of it. So right now in Brooklyn, there's another one of Widow Jane being built that's going to be bigger to accommodate, but keeping the same traditions and everything that they're doing, which is amazing. And they do that for all their brands, and I highly respect that. And now they have the money to be able to do that, which is incredible. So they're sourcing the whiskey from Kentucky and Indiana, but they're also making their own whiskey in the distillery itself. They're making the rye, which we're going to taste in a little bit. So they only do 5-barrel blends. So these are small. Everybody talks about small barrel. This really is. They're picking the best of the 5 barrels that they're aging in their own warehouse to make their specific blends. And that's something really cool. So it's very, very small. It's obviously a scientific process of going through and tasting the barrels, finding the right ones. You get the consistency, but also unique products every single time. The cool thing is about the Paradigm Rye that we're going to taste is the Paradigm Rye is now most ryes we see on the marketplace will have a little bit of malted barley, right? Because they need the enzymes to break down the rye, because as somebody once said to me, rye is a sticky bitch and it's very, very hard to distill, right? And ask Sienna, she's like, oh, it's my nightmare, right? She's like, but they do. So our ryes are 100% rye. There's no barley. It is 100% rye. And what's really cool about the Paradigm Rye is that it is the first one that's commercially out there in the world that has rye made from our distillery. So they blend a Kentucky rye, an Indiana rye, and then they take rye from our distillery and blend them together. Again, they're aged in our warehouse, and they're a minimum of 5 barrels. So that are blended into this particular rye. So they wanted to do something really different and unique. So that's the name Paradigm. They wanted to create like the creaminess and the mouthfeel of a bourbon, but then have that spiciness of a rye. So I mean, this is a rye I can sip like on its own, in a glass, and I consistently do.
So does this fit into like, I think they had the American oak and then they had the cherry wood rye, which were the traditionals. So will those still be made in addition to this? Or are they sunsetting the others?
The traditional oak is no longer, as far as I know, I don't think we're producing that anymore. Don't quote me on that, but I definitely, the cherry wood, yes.
Okay.
So not cherry wood, applewood.
Applewood, sorry.
Applewood rye. So the applewood rye, yes, still being out there. I love that brand because they put an applewood stave into the barrel itself. which I think is really unique and different. So, and it really does have some of those apple notes, and it's a very different drinking rye whiskey. But so the two of them are kind of like our rye portfolio.
Got it.
So we got Paradigm Rye, and then we got the Applewood Rye.
Gotcha.
But have you guys tasted it yet?
Yeah, I've gone through the whole portfolio that we'll be tasting today already, and this is my rye. Like, I love this one. It's citrus, caramel, vanilla, burnt sugars like on the nose, fades into that burnt sugar, like flamed citrus almost. So the citrus kind of doles out, but that toasted vanilla and brown sugar like start to highlight, and then just a really nice, simple finish that's medium, and like this is a rye that's craveable to me. Like, just pour it over a rock, enjoy your life. Yeah.
And it's an average of 6 years old. So these are all straight ryes blended together. As I said, some of it coming from a portion of it coming from our actual distillery, which eventually their goal is to make it 100% at our distillery, all of it. And it's 46.5% ABV.
Yeah. So 93.
Yeah. It does not drink like that. It's a really soft and easy drinking rye. And I'll sip it on rocks, but I would also make an incredible Manhattan with this and have.
Yeah.
So when I first tasted this, Jake, my first thought was I better leave a lot in this bottle because I'm sure this will end up on Jake's bar. Because that's what I was thinking. I was like, Jake's going to love this.
Yeah.
I will say at first I was a little bit scared because it has that green grass note, which I do not like in rye. But that's mainly on the nose, because when you get to the palate, it's kind of like a green or a black tea. Like It's got a little bit of the green or black tea, like astringency, but it's got also like a pop of like fruit. I think it's like lemon or something like lemon oils. But I think it's really nice, and the proof's nice, and I would have a hard time believing that this is 100% rye, because it does have like a nice sweetness to it. That's not real grassy. That's not real spicy. I know that sounds weird, but
no, because most ryes are spicy. You buy it for the spice. It's like you're looking for that bold spiciness. And one of their visions was we wanted to create something that was different. We didn't want it to be the traditional spicy rye. We wanted it to be our rye, and our rye we wanted to be vanilla note a little bit, but then have that spice kind of shine through and a little bit of fruit notes shine through. So it's the blend of the 100%, the blends that they're picking at their house is gold that just give it this uniqueness that you're not going to see in many other ryes.
Yeah, no, the rye is killer. And I'm going to go raid Scott's bar later for this. I'll trade you something. I'm sure I got something here that you want that we can trade that showed up at the house. But I've always been impressed with Widow Jane for the innovation, but also from the LTOs, right? I think the limited time offerings from Widow Jane have always been something that have stuck out because it just rises to the top. Like they always do. The vaults have always been great. The 10 years have always been great. What was the Unlucky 13 or Lucky 13 is always good. And this Vault's 15, let me tell you what. Like, if you are a bourbon drinker and you are not drinking the Vault's 15 or trying to find this, holy shit, you're an idiot. Like, it's really damn good.
Yeah, it's not the least expensive bourbon, but it shouldn't be. It's 15 years old and higher.
Yeah, like this blend probably has 17, 18, 19-year-old whiskey in it, or bourbon in it. And like, if you like a little bit of grain forwardness, you like a creamy whiskey with cinnamon, sugar, vanilla, and oak, this is it. Like, it tastes almost like a wheat bourbon. And I don't know if it's got wheat in it or not. And I don't think it does.
I don't think that does it. They actually don't talk about the mash bill, so I'm not sure what the mash bill is.
But it's delightful.
But it is. I mean, it is a 15-year-old, and it is. I mean, one of the things they like to do is like, so it's a, they are picking the rarest, barrels that they can, and they're blending them together, the rarest and the finest within the warehouse, and blending them. As you said, it's a 15-year-old plus, so there's probably 16, 17, 18-year-olds. But what is interesting to this, it kind of gives that unique note, is that it's aged. Then after they're blended together, they're then finished. So we're big into finishing things. We do it with all the vaults are usually finished in something unique. So this one is finished in a 4-year air season, and I'm going to pronounce this incorrect, a Chinquapin oak.
Oh.
Chin.
Yeah.
How, you know how to pronounce it?
Yeah. Chinquapin.
Chinquapin. Okay, Chinquapin. I was close. Chinquapin oak, right? So this is so it's air season, right? So that means they're getting all everything that the elements can add to it. So they're air season for at least 48 months. And the one thing that Sienna was explaining to me, like why I was like, why does that matter? What does it do? And she said the Chinquapin actually absorbs the whiskey in a deeper way, so you get more complexity, right? So it's like deeper saturation that really gets more intensity of the complex flavors from that oak itself. So you're going to get those dark fruits, those almonds, those like rich toffee notes. And it's just something really like on the nose. It's like such an interesting. It's like that little bit of that note, those spice notes.
I love that you talked about like the almond.
Yeah, there's definitely an almond note in there. Definitely
like,
some dark fruits.
Yeah, some type of nut. Like that. That's so good. And Michter's has
also like a pear turnover. That's one of their notes, and I'm like, oh yeah,
pear turnover. Interesting. I've never had one. Scott, what of the Michter's has one that's in Chinquapin? It's Shanks or Baumburgers is one of them, but they finish one in there and Chinquapin, whatever the hell it's called.
I think it's Chinquapin. Yeah. There's a bunch of extra letters in the word that don't need to be there. I think that's what it is.
Whatever it's called. It's an oak so we can still call it a bourbon, right? That's all that matters.
That's all that matters. I mean, I also like for me, it's like there's a little bit of butterscotch on this.
It's so
like in the mouth, like a little molasses, raisin.
Like it's weird that on the nose I say creamy, but like I can smell the creaminess on the nose and it just carries over to the palate. Like it's just a creamy. I literally wrote down like cream soda. Like think of a big red or something like that. That's just like creamy red fruit driven through the entire experience. That is just like. It makes me want to go have White Castle and drink a Big Red. I don't know. That's bad, but I'm just being honest with us. Being honest with the people.
That's normally what you have when you have a $300 bottle of whiskey. So yeah, that's it.
I mean, that's what I do.
That's all you can afford after.
Exactly.
A couple White Castles.
Exactly.
White Castles. That's how I pair. That's what my pairing at home is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But as you said, if you're out there, if you can collect them, if you can find the 14 and the 13, like these are some great collections to have.
Oh yeah.
Because they are limited. So when you find one, you buy one because they're not everywhere and they only come out once a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Scott, what did you think of this one? Like, we haven't heard from you, but like, I talked about how much I loved it because I do.
I think it's definitely vanilla and butterscotch, especially on the nose. The butterscotch carries over to the palate quite a bit, but then also I get that oaky punch, and then also like tobacco. And I think you said like raisin, but that's sometimes what I consider like tobacco, raisin.
No, I get that. Tobacco, raisin, a little bit, but it's also in the nose. You ever anybody get toasted marshmallow? Like
I can see that, like a toasted sweet. Like I'm gonna say brulee. If you brulee a marshmallow, you definitely get that like right before it gets burnt. Like it's like 5 seconds. If you go 6, it's you now have bitter.
If all lit that marshmallow up on flames. Now I feel like I need to get creme brulee like somewhere because I've now had that's been a note twice today.
Oh man,
order some in a restaurant.
So this will be my last thing about food, but I was watching the Food Network because that's what I do in my spare time, and I was watching Guys Grocery Games, and they talked about quick cheesecake. Love cheesecake. And that gives me a little creme brulee like love too. So a block of cream cheese, confectioner sugar, vanilla, and heavy whipping cream. You throw that in your blender and then you can brulee that over time, like throw some sugar and brulee it. There you go.
There you go. All right.
Yeah.
I like
So
that.
you didn't have to go long. So like, that's what me and my wife did last night. So like, you know, we're almost at the finish line of pregnancy. We did that last night. So yeah, definitely enjoying the flavors and the palate on this one. So, you know, Elayne, we truly appreciate like just going through this experience with you and diving into the tasting notes, but also just stopping. It feels like we stopped at, you know, in France, we stopped in Evanston, and now we stopped in New York, which is your hometown. So we're going to let you get back to work here today. And we truly appreciate it. So as any good director of advocacy would be, tell us more where we can find out about the brands so people can follow along and hunt these bottles down over the next couple months.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, all of them have their own, you know, Instagram accounts. You can definitely follow. So any, you know, at Widow Jane, at Few, at Brenne, but on the Samson Surrey website, if you go to Samson Surrey, you can find about each of our brands that we have, and each of the brands have their own websites as well. So pretty easy to find them online. So yeah, but yeah, if you're an Instagram person, just at, you know, Few Whiskey, at Widow Jane Whiskey, and at Brenne Whiskey, and you will be able to find everything you need to know.
And Few is very active on the social media in particular. So make sure you're paying attention to what's going on and all the cool things that's happening across the Samson and Surrey portfolio. Elayne, we are very thankful for you to join us today as you have walked us through one hell of a tasting, ending with the Volts, and we are excited to see what is next for this collection of a portfolio. As always, thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. We truly appreciate it. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, go over to Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Bourbon Lens. If you want to connect with us and be a part of our tasting club, go over to bourbonlens.com/ or go over to patreon.com/Bourbon Lens. We truly appreciate it if you join that. And last but not least, go to your favorite podcast listening app and make sure you hit that subscribe button. We would greatly appreciate it. And until next time, cheers.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. It was such a great way to spend an afternoon.
Thanks, Elayne.
Thank you.